Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Sue Johnson. I'm Sue to all of you. And I'm not sure whether you know who I am. I was a professor in clinical psychology for many years at the University of Ottawa. I'm also a professor at Alliant University in the States, in San Diego. And I'm the director of the International Association for Excellence in Emotionally Focused Therapy, the home of which is just out on Carling, quite near Carling and Maitland. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is EFT. If you don't know what that is, my son calls it extremely funny therapy, but actually what it stands for is emotionally focused therapy. And this is an approach that was created in the 1980s that is a mixture of a Rogerian, Carl Rogers approach to creating safety in the session and dealing with emotion, and a mixture of more systemic Minuchin interpersonal interventions. So we kind of mix a focus on self and system here. But it's called emotionally focused because, particularly in the family and couple field, when it first started in the 80s, it was absolutely not accepted that that you should focus on emotion and that you should use emotion to create change, and that you could help people with their emotion directly, and that this was considered foolish. Emotion was part of the problem. You had to get people to contain it, go past it, focus on their cognitions, their dysfunctional cognitions, trick them into new kinds of interactions. But, you know, it was really unfashionable to go directly into a work with emotion. So that's what we do. And we've been doing it since the 80s. If you'd like to go to our website, www.iceeft.com, there's lots and lots of resources on that website. You can buy training tapes. You can look at presentations. If you want to go to my website, drsuejohnson.com, drsuejohnson.com, you can look at all kinds of little pieces of tape and video and little blogs, things that if you're more interested to develop further, some of the things I'm going to say today. I talk a lot about attachment and the new science of relationships that's happened in the last 15, 20 years. If you're particularly interested in that, you should read my book, Love Sense. You can get it on Amazon, or Hold Me Tight, which talks a lot about how much attachment theory has added to our understanding of who we are as human beings. We're basically not just social animals, we're bonding animals, and to understanding our relationships. So you can find lots of resources on those websites. You can go on the ICEF website and see chapters on trauma. Most of them have transcripts in them. Or you can look at the book that came out in 2002, Emotionally Focused Couple Therapy with Traumatized. I always forget the title. Emotionally Focused Couple Therapy for Trauma Survivors with Guilford. That came out in 2002. So there's lots of resources. Emotionally Focused Therapy is more or less the gold standard for empirically based interventions in couple therapy right now. We haven't done so much work in families. We work with families all the time, but we need to do that as well. We've been kind of busy in the last few years with couples and trying to bring an active focus on emotion and emotion regulation and all this bonding science into the couples field. As I go along, I think you will also get that the things I say in terms of dealing with emotion, understand people from an attachment point of view, are just as relevant when you work with an individual. And maybe I should say off the bat that right from the beginning, EFT and EFT therapists have been working with trauma survivors. And from my point of view, this approach is particularly suited to working with people who've been through devastating, overwhelming experiences where they have been rendered helpless. And I think there's lots of reasons for that, but two of the most basic are that attachment and attachment science now gives us a deeper understanding of our emotions, of what renders us helpless, and what the solutions to that kind of helplessness are. So attachment, which is really all about how we deal with our vulnerability and how there's only so many ways to deal with our vulnerability. Attachment is, I think, a particularly useful perspective to have when you're looking at people who've gone through trauma. And of course, anyone who works with trauma has to be actively engaged in helping people regulate their emotion. I mean, this is one of the core problems, if not the core problem, with post-traumatic stress disorder. People are either numbed out, which of course is the most pernicious symptom of trauma, the one that predicts that PTSD will continue and maintain itself, because if you're completely numbed out, you cannot have any corrective healing experiences. You're numbed out. So people are either numbed out when they're traumatized as a way of dealing with that trauma, or they're hypervigilant, vigilant all the time for threat, and highly aroused, and often that means that they have lots of free-floating anxiety and free-floating anger. Please note right there, when you think of those two symptoms, that those two symptoms will actively destroy your most intimate relationships. And from an attachment point of view, the natural place to heal from trauma is not in a therapy session or by taking a drug. The most natural place to heal from trauma is in the arms of the people you love. And so for the things I just said, I think it's not accident that right from the beginning, EFT therapists have worked with traumatized people so much, and that we've written about it so much. It just naturally fits with this approach to doing therapy. I think the other reason it fits is because when we teach you EFT, and there are resources everywhere in the world for learning EFT. In fact, there's an EFT externship going on this coming weekend here in Ottawa with some of my colleagues, and I believe that we have a large number of military folks like yourself in that externship. But one of the things we teach people in EFT is how to go into emotional experience safely, how to titrate risks, how to create safety in the session, how to take people into those emotions in a way that they can tolerate, how to discover that emotion, distill and order that emotion. When you order emotion, it becomes tolerable. I'm going to say that again. When you order emotion, it becomes tolerable. And then how to move people into corrective emotional experiences. And I'm mostly going to talk about couples therapy here because that's what I'm most well known for. If you don't know my work at all, and this all sounds rather overwhelming, probably the best way into my work is actually to read Hold Me Tight, which I wrote for the public a number of years ago. Or if you want some more science involved, to read Love Sense, and then go and read some of the trauma literature that we've written. But the fact that we deal with emotions so actively, the fact that we actively know how to create emotional balance where you don't have to numb out and you don't have to be constantly agitated and vigilant, and the fact that we know how to create safe haven relationships in the session and with couples makes a huge impact on people working with trauma. Just to give you a snapshot of that, we don't help partners. We don't help the people that our traumatized folks, our soldiers, for example, turn to for support. We don't help them understand PTSD. And so inevitably, they don't understand, and they take the PTSD symptoms of the traumatized person personally, and it starts to destroy their comfort in the relationship. So it's almost impossible for them to offer sensitive care and comfort to the traumatized person when it really matters. But can you imagine just a small little snapshot of what can happen when a couple in EFT, this was a soldier in fact, when as a result of working in EFT, the soldier whose flashbacks usually come in the middle of the night, and usually what he does, he gets up in the middle of the night and takes drugs and cuts himself, and then feels really ashamed and shuts everybody out for a few days until it happens again. He's living in isolation. And what attachment theory says is that isolation is inherently traumatizing for human beings. And if you are trying to face the dragon of trauma alone, you're just not going to make it. You're not going to make it. We just do not have the ability to face dragons alone. Our nervous system isn't equipped for it. We're not supposed to be able to do that. So rather than do those things, can you imagine the change in this man's life when he is able, as a result of the conversations in EFT, to turn to his wife in the middle of the night and put his hand on her shoulder and say, "It's come for me again." And because they've talked about how much intimacy he can tolerate at that moment, and because she really understands him and has learned how to tune into him in session, she can turn and simply open her arms and hold him. And his experience is that when the dragon comes for him, when the ghosts come for him, that he has a safe place. And it's in the arms of someone who loves and understands him. And he can then tranquilize his nervous system with his natural touch, which is the basic way that our nervous system, that's the basic way we know how to handle emotion, is regulating our emotion with the help of other people. So he can be soothed, and he wakes up in the morning with a memory that he was not alone with those ghosts, and a memory of returning to emotional balance and more trust in his wife. Each time he's able to do this, his relationship, please note, gets stronger. When you help couples face trauma together successfully, their relationship gets stronger, and the person with PTSD finds that there is a safe place in the world. So just to sort of give you a snapshot of what we're talking about here. Attachment is a theory of development of the personality. I don't know how much you know about it, but it was only applied to mothers and children for many years, and it's only really been actively applied to adults in clinical work since about 1990. But basically, attachment really focuses on the fact that we need other people to constructively deal with our vulnerability. That this is bred in our bones. It's not a decision you make per se, it's basically who you are. And that the only really constructive way to face dragons and demons is with other people holding your hand, standing beside you. Soldiers know that. They don't go into battle alone, and they risk their lives for each other daily because they know that this connection with other people is in the end the only safety we have. So what attachment does is it gives people a language for their emotions, a language for their needs to be close. It validates the fact that we are all vulnerable, we're all human beings, that's nothing to be ashamed of. And by the way, that's another place where a partner can do something that no therapist can do. Shame often comes along with PTSD, and if a really good therapist has a small 20-watt light bulb to shine down into a pit of shame that somebody's in, I can assure you that a partner, even if they come in distressed in their relationship, that by the middle of the therapy, a partner has a stadium floodlight to shine down into that pit of shame. And that changes people. So what we try to do in EFT is we try to, even when somebody hasn't been traumatized, we help them understand the dance with their partner. We help them understand how losing your emotional balance and feeling disconnected and panicked at that disconnection plays a part in that dance. We help people see that distance traumatizes everybody, even people who haven't been to war. That feeling alone in the world is naturally traumatizing, and that we help people understand moments of disconnection, and then we gradually help them move into moments of connection and closeness where you don't just heal the relationship, you create a relationship that heals. So I'm trying to do a lot in an hour. I hope I'm trying to make it alive for you. I hope it's not too overwhelming. So, and I'm debating whether to tell you a bit more about attachment and then go into EFT. I think that's what I'm going to do, because attachment science is the basis of EFT. And I think the fact that we use this science, it's the first time in human history we've ever understood bonding, adult bonding, love relationships. So this science really gives the EFT therapist a different kind of place to stand and confidence, because we have a map to people's needs, to what goes wrong in relationships and how to put it right. And that's the first time we've ever had that. And what this science says is that, traumatized or not, we all get overwhelmed by life. We all feel uncertain and vulnerable. And in those moments, and also generally through our lives, not just when we're vulnerable, we need a safe haven, a person to go to on this planet, to take our sore places, our vulnerable places to, and to be held and comforted. The other person doesn't fix the problem, but they offer that emotional connection, which makes the problem tolerable, and then we can learn to face it together with them. So we need this safe haven, and we need a secure base. We use the fact as adults, when we're children, we need to hold on to our attachment figures all the time. As adults, we carry mental images of them around with us, and we can turn to those mental images when trauma gets overwhelming, and we can turn to them and use those mental images. And we actually talk to our clients about this in individual therapy as places of comfort. So what this science says is that when you carry around within you this sense that you are important to someone, you are loved, they care about you, they know you, they love you, they want to be with you. When you know that you matter to another person, you have a secure base that allows you to go out into the world and face the unknown and explore, and ironically be more separate and more confident in that separateness, because you know that there's another person who's with you on an emotional level. Attachment also says that there's not many ways of dealing with the key problem in relationships, which is not conflict or personality differences. All couples, traumatized or not, have conflict, and they all have personality differences. The key issue from an attachment point of view in distressed relationships is emotional disconnection, and the lack of emotional balance, the panic that comes from that emotional disconnection, from a sense of loneliness, loss, and the helplessness that comes with that. So basically what this approach says is we don't have many ways of dealing with that, and that when we cannot get this sense of emotional connection with the people we love, particularly when we're most vulnerable, we lose our emotional balance and we flip into reactive anger, pushing, demanding a response. I'll make you respond to me. I'll tell you all the things you're doing wrong. I'll demand. I will get you to respond to me. Or we flip into shutdown numbing. I don't want to talk about this. There's no point in talking to you. I can never please you anyway. This framework helps us understand normal relationship distress that normal relationship distress is exacerbated usually in a couple facing trauma. And from our point of view, this trauma can be anything. We're working with the Heart Institute at the moment in Ottawa. We've adapted our Hold Me Tight education program, which we also adapted to the military, the American military, many years ago. And they sometimes use that. But we've adapted it at the Heart Institute for cardiac couples, because for some of those couples, the whole heart attack incident and the consequences of that incident are extremely traumatizing. And the evidence is that if it ends up getting in the way of the relationship, the couple cannot cooperate around new health behaviors, around adapting to the fact that one person has a cardiac problem. The relationship goes downhill, and as the relationship goes downhill, the patient goes downhill. And that's more or less the same for all kinds of trauma. So attachment helps us understand what relationship distress is all about, and how relationship distress and the ability to keep your balance in a relationship sort of interact, if you like. Emotional signals organize relationships. They organize the dance. Emotion is the music of the dance. If you're going to really change in a real way the way a couple dance together, you have to change that emotional music one way or another. And teaching people to suppress it or bypass it basically just doesn't work. And I'm saying that I'm not saying that as a therapist, I'm saying that from all the research on emotion and emotion regulation, it just doesn't work. So, you know, what we do is we try to help people shift the way they play their emotional music, and then when you have new music, you create a new dance with the partner, a dance that gives, especially the traumatized partner, safe haven, secure base to start to heal from the trauma, right? When people come together, our experience of traumatized couples is this makes an enormous, enormous, enormous difference. I think I had a conversation with somebody in the military a little while ago and said, if you really want to stop soldiers committing suicide, the most effective, efficient way to do it, if they have an intimate relationship at all, is to give them some sessions and help their partner understand what's going on and help the soldier turn to their partner. And then I assure you that when they're vulnerable, if they can turn to their partner, they will not turn to death. You know, we use this is what all of us use to deal with existential fears. You know, Mozart said, love guards the heart from the abyss. And this is true, particularly for trauma folks, but whether you're dealing with trauma or not. So I just went through attachment theory and science in a flash of light. So you can ask questions if that's not very clear. So what do we do in EFT? First and foremost, we create safety. And a lot of our training is about that. We create safety, and we see this safety from an attachment point of view, which means that when we create a therapeutic alliance, we assume that we're a surrogate attachment figure. So we are collaborative. We focus on the present. If the past comes in, it's emotionally relevant. We'll deal with it in the here and now, but we don't focus much on the past. We focus on the present and how the past turns up in the present, coping, habitual.
Hi, Sue, if you can hear us, we just got you locked up for a second there.
Okay. Am I back?
You are.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure, so I'm going to try and pick up, okay?
Thank you.
I can't remember where I was. What was the last thing you heard?
We focus on the present and how the past shows up in the present.
Yes. And basically what we do is, because we're using an attachment framework, we stay with people. We're emotionally present in the session. We're a surrogate attachment figure. We stay with people and we regulate with our empathy, our emotional accessibility and responsiveness. We help regulate their emotion as they walk into these difficult places of relationship distress and their trauma history, and how their trauma history impacts the way they dance with their partner. So we spend a lot of time creating safety. EFT is a very non-pathologizing approach. It focuses on what you do now in the session, how you construct your emotion, how you put it together, how you regulate it, how you play this music, and how you dance with your partner. And is the way you dance with your partner leading you into more connection and safety, or is it leading you into more disconnection? In EFT terms, conflict in relationships is the inflammation. The virus is emotional disconnection. So we're always focused on moments of disconnection and moving people into moments of positive connection. In EFT, the change mechanism is not explanation. Explanations are interesting, but they don't particularly work when you're falling through space and you lose your emotional balance. We try to take people into new corrective experiences where they regulate their emotion differently and they connect with their partner differently, and then that more secure connection feeds back into how they regulate their emotion. So what we usually see in therapy is we see folks who have faced the dragon, only found one particular way of dealing with that dragon, and are stuck in a particular way of playing their emotional music, dealing with their emotions, and this stuck place is now destroying their relationship with their partner. And we call this the trauma trap. You know, the more overwhelmed you are and the more you've lost your emotional balance and you're in vigilance, panic, and you're always fending off this sense of helplessness, the less able you will be to respond to your partner, the less emotional balance you will have, the more numbed out and angry you will be, and your relationship will go downhill when you need it the most. And as your relationship goes downhill, you will feel more lonely, more helpless, more unsure of yourself, have more shame, and your PTSD symptoms will get worse. So you get a dreadful, dreadful, toxic dance going on between the inability to deal with emotions and to create, and what that means is you never create a coherent, constructive, tolerable narrative about the trauma, because you're always just fending off these difficult emotions, and you're doing it alone. So the trauma symptoms get worse, your ability to deal with them gets less, your relationships go downhill, and we try to stop that trauma trap. So first of all, what we do in EFT is we de-escalate negative cycles. We talk to people about, you know, how the trauma shows up in their relationship. We talk to people about the dreadful cycle they're caught in and how it leaves them both alone. And we help them look at the point that the dance is the problem. It's not the traumatized person that's the problem. It's not the partner that's the problem, the fact they can't cope with all this stress. It's the dance that's the problem. And we help people get a meta view of what's going on, and we help them step out of the dance. And when they start to do that, they start to create enough safety that then they can go in and take risks and learn a new dance of more secure emotional connection. We restructure their attachment relationship. And by the way, if you want the research on this, you can go to the website and look at it. There's all these studies. The latest one we did was, indeed, we did show that we don't just change satisfaction, we can restructure people's relationships and make their relationships more secure. And when you're more secure, you can deal with everything better, including dragons and ghosts. And you can create more coherent stories of your experience, which helps you heal from trauma. So to give you an example, I worked with a military couple I'll try to disguise these names. I find it difficult because I lapse into them because I feel close to my clients. So let's call him Sam. Sam comes in because the military psychologists don't know what to do with him, because he has been an alcoholic for many years and he is now stopped drinking. He's about to retire. And as he stopped drinking, all these PTSD symptoms have come up from his tours in places like Bosnia. And also he's remembering all kinds of trauma from his childhood, which is not unusual, right? We all know what that's about. So, you know, Sam is dealing with overwhelming emotion. And he has a wife of 35 years. They've had a pretty rocky go of it, but she's apparently loving and caring and wants to support him. And Sam's driving everyone crazy, including therapists, because he doesn't want to talk about his war experiences. He doesn't want to talk about his, you know, he's actually let go of alcohol now, but he doesn't want to talk about anything except for the fact that he wakes up every morning, he goes to sleep every night with a flashback about an apparent affair that his wife had about 30 years ago. And when we go into it, it's pretty iffy if it was an affair at all. Basically, he says that they were together for a few years and their relationship was pretty rocky, and then they somehow, from his point of view, reached this place where they were incredibly happy. And, you know, everything looked good. And for the first time in his life, he felt safe. That's very significant. And then he realized that his wife was enrolled in a course at university and that she was going for coffee with another male student who was helping her with her work. And he found this very difficult. But then he found that he was away one evening and this man came over to the house and helped his wife with a paper. And he became enraged, totally enraged. He decided that this man and his wife had been having an affair. He flew into a rage, and then he decided to suppress it. That, which is very hard work and just makes you much more agitated. And that's what the research says, okay? Suppression is really a lousy affect regulation strategy. So he decided to forgive her. He's a very religious man, and he decided to suppress it because he was married. So he put it on the shelf and started drinking. So then all these years later, he stops drinking, and what comes screaming out of the closet is not his experience of walking through dead bodies on a battlefield, but this incredible memory that his wife, who really looks like a nice lady and has appeared to be a good wife all these years, is really a whore, and she's really betrayed him, and he's obsessed with this. And he's got about 8 diagnoses, one of which is obsessive compulsive disorder, full-blown PTSD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he speaks about it constantly, and he flips between being quite verbally abusive to her, enraged, irritated. He gets irritated at me when I try to slow him down and talk about what's going on underneath all this reactive rage, or he lapses into sort of spacing out and kind of numbing and then going into feeling sorry for himself and saying that really she's been a good wife. And this is what he does in the first 2 sessions of therapy. And here's one of the problems. You do need a map, especially you need your own safe haven if you're a therapist dealing with distressed families and couples and traumatized families, because they push you off balance and the relationship becomes chaos. Everything gets escalated. This lady was pretty good. She tried to help him. She would try to tolerate his attacks, and she would say, this is just the PTSD talking, sweetie. But then after a while, she would just turn away from him and shut down to protect herself. And then when she did that, he would say, there you are, you see, you're not even listening to me, you don't care about me. You guys recognize this. This is a nice, tight, recurring dance of relationship distress and helplessness, panic. It's, you know, it's just so recognizable, you know it. But I must say, I found him pretty difficult. So, and I started to understand why all these other professionals had sort of started to give up on him. and were changing his medications every few weeks, which didn't help. So to give you an example of how attachment helps me here, once I get past the fact that he's not going to listen to me and my fears that I can't help this couple, you have to get past that. Once I get past that fact, I really start to listen to him and use my attachment glasses and tune into the emotional attachment channel. So what I'm able to say to him is, could you help me? What you're telling me is that you always lived a life full of demons and danger, always, and that the battlefield is really no different. It was just a bit worse. But there was one time in your life when you felt safe, and it was when you thought this lady was with you. And then suddenly, from your point of view, something happened that changed that. And then there was no place in life for you that was safe. And the only way you could deal with that was to drink all the time. But there was no place in life. So could you help me? You've stopped drinking now, and you wake up in the morning. And when you wake up, it's like your body says to you, is there a safe place, or are you completely alone? If you call, is there somebody who will come? Is there somebody who you could say, are you there for me, or am I completely alone? And you check that out. Because that's a basic question that we're all asking in relationships all the time. Are you there for me? Do I matter to? If I call, will you come? If you like, that's the most basic human question of all. Because when we're small, we know that if we call and no one comes, we die. So we know that in our bones. So I say, so in the morning you wake up and you've lost this sense of safety, and you say to yourself, the world is a dreadful, disastrous place full of despair and dragons. Is there any safety? And you say to yourself, I only have one lifeline, and it's this woman over there in the chair. It's this woman. She's the only possible lifeline. And then your brain says, so check, be vigilant, because there's danger everywhere. Is there a crack in this lifeline? Is there a crack in this lifeline? And you find one. You say, yes, there is a crack. Remember, remember, remember. You think she had an affair. And you become obsessed with the crack. And you push on it and push on it to see if you can change it, heal it. And as you push on it and push her and say, didn't you have an affair? Didn't you? Didn't you? You did, you did. You push on it because you need that lifeline whole. You need it whole. And you're so worried about the crack. And you're obsessed with the crack. And he says, yes, that's right. And he calms down. I say, okay. And if there is a crack in that lifeline, then you're completely alone, aren't you, Carl? And there's no point in anything. The dragon is too big, the darkness is too much. And anyway, who cares about a fight if you're completely alone? And he weeps. And he says, I have always been alone, always, always, except for a few minutes with her. I say, yes, I understand. I've gone underneath all his reactive rage to the vulnerability. I say, I understand. I've changed the emotional music. I understand. So then I'm going to use the new emotional music to create a new relationship dance. I say, so could you tell her, please? Could you tell her? You're my only lifeline. I'm so scared that there's a crack here, that I can't really depend on you. You're all I have. I'm so scared. I keep pushing on that crack. I'm so scared that I'm all alone with the dragon. Can you tell her? And he tells her. And he starts to tell her about his sadness and his helplessness and how much he needs her and how he's never allowed himself to say that to another human being in his whole life. And she responds to him. She doesn't reason with him, tell him it's his PTSD, or shut down and get quiet. We help her. She responds to him. She turns and comforts him. And he starts to change. He starts to change. That, from our point of view, I mean, I'm trying to capture it for you in a snapshot. That is a key corrective emotion experience from our point of view. If you look at what I did there as an EFT therapist, what I did was what we call, it's the recurring steps we do in EFT all the time. The stages of therapy can change. The vulnerability, we slow things down, speed things up. But if you look at me as an EFT therapist, I was doing there what an EFT therapist always does. Again and again and again, you do the same thing. What do I do? I'm going to list them for you. We call this the Eft Tango, but you don't have to call it that. We only call it that because I write about it and I'm obsessed with Argentine tango. Did you know that you have a very vibrant Argentine tango community here in Ottawa, and that real tango, not Dancing with the Stars, is a PhD in attunement, which is what therapy is too. It's a PhD in attunement. So what do? I stay in the present. I stay safe. I modulate people's emotion to be listened to and held and have your experience made sense of, calms down your nervous system, right? So I get past my irritation, get my emotional balance, and listen to Carl from an attachment point of view and hear what he's saying on that channel. And I go in and I reflect present process. Here's what's happening for you right now. What's happening for you is you're desperately seeking for that few moments of safety you had all those years ago. You're desperately seeking to make sure that this lifeline with your lady exists, that it's real. And you're tormented with the idea that it's not. And so you push on her and you push on her. And you say, you let me down, you let me down, you betrayed me, you betrayed me. You're desperately trying to fix and make sure that you want her to persuade you it's not true. You want a way out. But all that happens is the more you push and the more you accuse her, you don't get any certainty. And then she turns away and shuts down. And then you say, there you are, you see, you're not there for me. You watch people. They set up a dance that confirms their worst fears. That's what they do all the time, right? And of course, Carl is amazingly insecure in his attachments, and we could talk more about that a little later. So you stay with the present and you show him what he's doing on an emotional level, on a dance level. And she tries to support you, but you don't believe her when she tries. And so in the end, she shuts down and moves away, and she shuts down, and you say, there you are, you see, you've abandoned me, you weren't there for me, and you did have the affair. And then you get angrier, and you feel more helpless and more desperate, and you do it again. And the more you push on her and try to get through this and prove that she's really there for you, right, the more you test this out, the more she moves away. And the more she moves away, the more alone and helpless and desperate you are. And he says yes. So I've focused on his inner reality and distilled it and put it together in an ordered way, and on how that inner reality then creates the dance he's in with his partner. And we reflect that. And then I go deeper into his emotion at some point. And of course, I'm working with him right now. Later, I'll work with her, okay? So I'll go deeper into his emotion, and I'll get him to touch that if he doesn't do this, then the fear comes up, and the fear is he's completely alone. So he cannot tolerate that aloneness. So he triggers up into anger and rage, and I'll fix it. I'll find a way to forgive her. I'll get her to prove that admit that she had the affair. I'll change this somehow by pushing on this safety cord, right? So he starts to move into his helplessness and his sadness and his terror that he's alone. And when he can do that, he changes the emotional music. Then that's step 2. So step 1, you clarify the inner process and the process between. You reflect it to people in a safe, unblaming way that they can connect with and make sense of their experience. That allows them to be more balanced and more present. Step 2, you deepen their emotion. And at this point, we have a map to all this emotion So we're not overwhelmed by it. We know sort of what's there. We have a language for it, a structure for it. So we know how to go in. You deepen the emotion, you change the emotional music into the softer emotions. Sadness, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being rejected, aloneness, shame, there's something wrong with me. Those are the basic emotions that are waiting there underneath all this, always. So you move him into his emotions on a different level. That's step 2 in the tango. Step 3, you use the new emotion to create a new dance. Carl, can you turn to her and say? And he speaks this softer emotional music, which pulls her towards him instead of pushing her away. He speaks it, right? So you turn the new music into a new dance. Step 4, you process the new step in the dance. Carl, what was it like to turn and tell her that? What was it like to turn and tell her about how terrified you are, how that aloneness has stalked you all your life? It was worse, that aloneness, than what you saw on the battlefield. What was it like to turn and tell her that? And he's quietened right down. He doesn't look like the same guy. He's quiet, he's calm. He says, it feels good. It feels good to tell her that, and that's the truth. It feels like I've been running all my life, and I've suddenly stopped running. It feels good to tell her that. And then I ask her, can she take it in? Can she receive it? Because sometimes our partner can give us a new message, and even though the therapist knows there's lots of positive possibilities in it, we aren't used to it. We don't thank the therapist from changing the enemy we know into the stranger we don't know. So sometimes we have a hard time taking it in. So we say to her, can you hear him? Can you hear him when he says this? And she cries and says, yes, I can. I can hear it. And what I realize is, there wasn't any affair. Whether he ever believes that or not, I don't know. But what I do realize is that the way we've danced together over the years, where he would get anxious and controlling and push on me, and I would finally end up shutting down, I'm starting to understand that in those shutdown moments, that he would feel alone, and then this would build on his uncertainty. That was a very perceptive thing to say. Not many clients do that, but she was incredible. And I said, yes. So what's happened here is not just Carl's experience coming into this relationship. What's happened is their dance, the way they've dealt with their emotions, sent emotional signals to each other, has perpetuated his uncertainty, his fears, his way of dealing with his emotions, and hers too, because her usual way of dealing with her emotions was to shut down, not to stand up to him, right? One of the most moving moments was she said to him, you remember that time before you decided I was having an affair as a happy time. You remember it and count on it. And what I want to tell you that you probably don't want to know is that I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy because you were so strong and so controlling and so dominant of me that I felt I had nowhere to go. And I was actually thinking of leaving you at that time. So when she does that, then I support her. She comes out into the relationship and she sends him new music and the dance changes again. So step 1, stay with present process. Discover and distill the emotional music and the dance that's happening now and its consequences, which is they're both alone. Step 2, you deepen emotion to create new music. Step 3, you create a new dance, enactment. Step 4, you process the new steps. So she says, Carl, when you tell me about your sadness, all I want to do is comfort you and be there for you. I love you. I've always loved you. All I want to do is comfort and be there for you. So, that's incredible. So then they have a moment of connection. And this is what happens in EFT. You get moment after moment after moment where they exit their negative interactional cycle They change the way they deal with their emotion, and the trauma comes in here. The trauma is dealt with more constructively, right? And they start to grow. They start to grow out of disconnection into connection. Step 5 in the EFT Tango, you look at what they've just done, put their experience together in a new way, interacted together in a new way that has more emotional accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement in it. That's what a secure bond is. It's characterized by moments of emotional accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement, ARE. Accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. The answer to the question, are you there for me, in a secure bond is yes, especially when you need me the most, which is when dragons come for you. So ARE. So they are suddenly more accessible, responsive, and engaged with each other. And you build those moments over a course of EFT. Step 5, you celebrate what they've done. You hold the camera up and you say, wow, look at what you just did. Just the way a mother does to a child that's just gone down a slide. The mother doesn't say, oh, that was good. Some mothers do. But if you watch a really engaged mother, the mother goes crazy. The mother says, wow, look at what you just did. And that's what we do. The message is, you're competent. You can make sense of your trauma. You can make sense of this relationship distress. Relationships make sense. Your emotions make sense. You're competent. You can deal with them. And you can change your relationship. That's what you understand, you can shape. You can change your relationship. And so people start to grow, and as they grow in confidence, their window of tolerance for this negative emotion starts to expand, and you can go more and more into the trauma. So, you know, these are the 5 steps. So it ends up with validation, a summary of what's happened, all kinds of recognition for what they've done. You put it up on the wall, you say, look at what you just did, you describe the process. All of this you need safety for, constant safety. And for that you have to attune to your client and tune into your client's face. And a lot of what we do in EFT is we teach you how to do that and how to work with emotion. This is very different. You are emotionally present for people. And this is very different from some of the protocols for working with trauma. You know, I taught a trauma course at the university, and I used to look, for example, at a manual put out by Edna Foer, who's into exposure, and just how she would do an assessment. And, you know, we would look at it, and we would look at the strengths and weaknesses. There were lots of strengths, but the weakness from our point of view was that she stayed distant from the client. It's like the client was recounting this, and when the client went into relationship emotional distress, which didn't fit the protocol, it wasn't giving information, the therapist went straight past it and just kept her to the protocol, refocused her on the protocol, which from an EFT point of view is an enormous mistake. You follow the client, and the emotion will tell you what's important. The emotion will tell you where the client lives. The emotion will tell you what matters. That's what emotion does. It tells us what matters. You know, so from that point of view, we saw her, that lady in that interview, doing that protocol, constantly leaving the client alone, right? And then the client gave less and less information. So I'm giving you an awful lot awfully fast. I think before we turn to questions, I'd like to just refocus here a bit. You know, I do, by the way, guys, by the end of the year, there will be, I did a 2-day course on trauma for traumatized couples in Tampa just a few months ago, and we're making it into a training tape. So you'll be able to get it by the end of the year. And if you would like, I will send you a free copy so that you can send it around if you wish. So let's just stay with how it's different when you work with trauma than regular couples. It's different because you have to go slower. It's different because you have to titrate the risks more carefully. A trauma survivor is already overwhelmed. So you have to make sure of your alliance, and you have to go in slowly. So at the Civic Hospital in Psychiatry, where I used to run the team there, we would say that a regular distressed couple with a traumatized relationship, who are traumatizing each other from an attachment point of view, we could work with them in 8 to 20 sessions usually, even if they were very escalated couple with lots of anger, lots of numbing. But if you've got trauma in the mix, whether it's from a car accident, from cancer treatment, from childhood incest or war, once you put trauma in the mix, we needed 30 sessions with them to really do effective EFT. But please note that what we meant by that was not just healing the relationship, but we expected to get the relationship to the point where the couple were actively healing the PTSD and the secondary PTSD that the partner often feels. So that's creating relationships where they can be there for each other when the dragon turns up in a way that is healing and where the relationship actually gets stronger each time they do it. So one way into thinking about this is, if you think about attachment, that McFarlane, in the original book he wrote with Bessel van der Kolk on trauma, points out that emotional attachment is our primary protection against feelings of helplessness and meaninglessness. So what we do in EFT is we create more secure attachment to help people create that protection for each other. Another way of thinking about it is that Alan Shaw talks about the fact that proximity to an attachment figure tranquilizes the nervous system. You can think about it literally that way, and I encourage you to think about it that way, because in our last study we actually did a brain scan study where we actually showed that after the bonding conversations in EFT, if you put women in a brain scan and told them they were going to be shocked on their ankles and the shock was going to hurt, that if they were left alone in a machine or with a stranger holding their hand, their brains went berserk at that information, and they said the shock was very painful. But after these bonding conversations in EFT, when their partner held their hand, they were told that they got the same information, they're about to be shocked. Their brain stayed completely calm, and they said that the shock was uncomfortable. That is an example of the human bonding brain using a secure connection as a massive safety cue that changes the way we perceive threat, not just how we deal with threat, but how we perceive threat. You know, emotional disconnection from the people you love is a danger cue, just like stepping on a nail is a danger cue. They're both dangerous for human beings. And I think it's worth noting that Nancy Eisenberger, in her research, she's a neuroscientist in LA, talks about the fact that if you put people in a brain scan machine and you submit them to rejection cues, and this isn't even rejection by someone they love, this is just general rejection cues, those rejection cues are processed in the exact same part of the brain and exactly the same way as physical pain. So I want you to think about how disconnection from the people you rely on is a danger cue. It's a danger cue, and it's registered in the same way as physical pain. This is a physical reality. You're not just talking about ideas. You know, love is an ancient wired-in survival code designed to keep the people that you depend on close to you. It's not just a whole mixture of sex and sentiment. I'm afraid there's somebody down the street using a machine. I hope it's not getting in the way of you hearing me. So I want to just summarize how it's different when we work with, I want to make sure I've got all these points here to you. When we work with traumatized couples. Yes. First of all, when you work with traumatized couples, you've got more distress. You have to expect that. And you've got more intense cycles of disconnection. People are more reactive, they're more easily triggered. Their withdrawal when it happens is more real. It can get to the point of dissociation. So everything's more extreme. The cycles of distress happen faster. You have to stop everything. You have to slow it down. From my point of view, the issue with emotion, we got it wrong. There's nothing irrational about emotion. And, you know, there's nothing particularly negative about emotion. The worst thing about emotion is it's fast. It's supposed to be fast. It's supposed to be fast enough to save your life. It has to get you to shift when you know, has to get you to run when you hear an alarm bell or, you know, run away from an image on a dark night. But from our point of view, the main thing we have to do to help people regulate their emotions differently is slow them down. And we use our voice and our presence and continuous emotional reflection, empathic reflection of their emotions to do that. Continuously. If you watch an EFT therapist, they slow everything down with their voice, they go low and slow, they talk in a soothing way, and they reflect people's experience in a way that orders it and makes it manageable. And that calms people down, slows down the cycle of emotional rev up or shut down and the cycle with the partner. You have to put an educational component in when you're working with trauma couples. We act it, but we do it in images in a very bottom-up way. We talk about the dragon, or if the couple have a word, you know, one soldier I worked with talked about the darkness, okay? So we do a little bit of education about trauma and how it impacts relationships, but we do it as it comes up in the session. We don't like do it top down, but you do have to do that and help people see how this dragon comes into their relationship and upsets everything. You have to be more careful about the possibility of violence in traumatized relationships, but we're generally careful about that. We kind of know how to assess for that. And we do work with couples where some violence has occurred. We'll grade that violence. The point is, the contraindication for EFT is that you cannot create emotional safety in the session. So with Carl in the first, with Sam in the first session, I was concerned that I couldn't stop him calling his wife a whore, for example. I mean, I did end up being able to stop him. I told him, you have to stop. I'm very sorry. I understand that you're angry, but we're going to talk about your anger, you know, because it's hard for me to sit and hear you call your wife that, and I think it's making it hard for her to listen to you, so I'm going to stop you when you do that. And he allowed me to do that. And so I could create a certain amount of emotional safety in the session. But obviously you have to be more aware of violence. You have to be more aware of addiction. Flores, F-L-O-R-E-S, has written a beautiful book on addiction and attachment. And what he basically says is if you go into the attachment channel, look with an attachment lens, all addictions are substitutes for attachment with other people, which is the natural positive way to deal with your emotions. So that's a useful way of thinking about it. But if somebody is constantly turning to a drug or alcohol every time they get upset, then it's like they're having an affair with drug and alcohol. And it's very difficult to create safety in the session or even have the other partner start to respond. So you have to deal with that as well. We take people into EFT when they admit that they have a problem, when they see the addiction as a problem, and they are at least working on it. Then we'll take them. But if somebody says, no, I like heroin, you call me an addict, I'm fine with it, and I'm going to continue to take it, and I don't really care if she minds or not, we're not going to take those folks into EFT. You have to be more aware of the alliance with traumatized couples. Sam put me through the ringer. He put me through the ringer. He tested me, you know, and he confronted me. He asked me to explain what I was doing. So I did. We do that all the time. EFT therapist believes in being transparent. And anyway, we know why we're doing what we're doing. We've got all the research that said it works, so why not include people? So, you know, he was more difficult to connect with. You have to expect emotional storms and crises. Actually, with that couple, there really weren't any after that. The storm was the first few sessions when he was sort of acting out all over the place. But you have to expect some relapses where things get too difficult for people. And we've just learned to ride those out and to keep going. I mean, what helps us with that too is that we trust our research results, and the research results are really good. And the research results that we have suggest that we can work with trauma folks, and that when we do, their trauma symptoms go down. So that gives us a certain confidence. Sometimes you have to just soothe people for quite a while. You have to help them soothe more than you do somebody whose nervous system hasn't been revved up by trauma. So you do more soothing, you're more careful, the risks you ask them to take are smaller, you know, and sometimes for different people, the destination is different. Not so much for soldiers, but for folks who've been traumatized as children sexually, sexuality might look different when they're talking about that in the second stage of EFT than with folks who haven't had that kind of trauma. So, you know, you have to be aware of that. You need to coordinate with other therapies sometimes. Like, you know, I did phone up Sam's psychologist and say, you know what, he is making progress. I think it would help me a lot if you would stop changing his medication every few weeks, if you wouldn't mind, because it seems to me to get in the way. So, you know, we had a conversation about that, and also about the fact that he'd got a new diagnosis called OCD as well, and that was messing everyone up. And so I had to say, I'm sorry, I don't think that label is going to be very helpful. He's not really OCD, he's just panicked. And when we're panicked, we keep feeling around for where the answer is. Give me out. That's what I think he's panicked. I think you should just leave him with his PTSD diagnosis. And you know, so and also people were irritated with him that he wasn't focusing on what they thought he should be focusing on, which was his war experience. And he was very clear that this is what he needed to focus on. He needed, and I think he was wise, he needed her beside him for him to even begin to look at his experiences on the battlefield. The other thing about it is when you're working with trauma, safety is everything. And you have to slow things down, and you have to titrate your interventions to the tolerance of the people that are with you. But as your alliance grows and their confidence in the process and in you grows, and as you get to know them and you're more tuned into them, it's easier and easier for you to know, to read their face, to listen to them, to get to know their emotional world, and to know how far they can go and how fast, and to back off and hold them and reassure them and comfort them when they can't move. So I've gone through quite a lot of stuff here. I hope it wasn't too much. And maybe what we could do now is have some questions.
All right. Thank you, Sue. That's such great information. We did have two questions come in the middle of the session. One from Ed, who's asking, are there any resources or a list of resources that you would be able to send us? I think we would have you just send it to Gada, who's been your contact at this point, for her to send to the rest of the participants.
I believe we did. I was under the impression that did you guys not get a I know. Didn't we send a chapter called United We Stand?
Yes, we did have that. And so would you say that most of this information is included in that?
Well, I think that's a very good start.
Perfect.
And then I think you could, you could get the trauma book, the 2002 trauma book, Working with Traumatized Couples. I don't think it's terribly expensive now with Guilford. And if you're interested in escalated couples, there's a DVD training tape that you can get from ICEFT on the ICEFT website called EFT in Action, where I'm working with a helicopter pilot from Iraq who has full-blown PTSD, but from my point of view, his main problem is he can't deal with his PTSD because he has no safe haven in his relationship. He has a highly escalated, incredibly anxious wife who interrupts all the time. So he flips between rage and zone out, and she's right up here all the time, demanding to talk to her. So if you want to watch me working with that couple, it's a good tape because I supervise the therapist first, and then I go in and work with the couple, and then I talk about what I did with the couple. So it's a pretty rich tape, and that's a training tape. You can get that from ICEFT. And again, if you want this for your group, my institute will send you that training tape to share. Usually what we do in ICEFT is we try to do everything we can to support you guys in the military. I grew up in a naval family. My father was a sailor who all through the war, and as a child, I grew up in a British pub surrounded by men and women who had PTSD. So this stuff is close to me, and so we always try to do things to help you guys work with our soldiers and their families.
Thank you, Sue. We do have another question that I think probably some other people here would have too, so I think it's a great question. And that is, do you have any advice for how to work with just the spouse of a traumatized person if that partner won't come to therapy?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Well, what you can do is you can listen to the spouse, and you can use the understanding you have of relationships and relationship cycles that you can get from reading something like Hold Me Tight or Love Sense or the article I sent or any EFT literature. You can use the understanding to help her, to talk about the cycle, her dance, and to help her understand her relationship a little better, help her understand her own emotions. But the tricky thing is you have to remember that on one level you're always in fantasy because you've never seen that relationship. So, what you have is one person's view of the landscape. You do not have the landscape. You have one person's view of it. And so you have to be real careful. The world is full of individual therapists blaming the hell out of their clients' partners. It's just endemic. And they're doing it with the best intentions in the world, but what they don't get is that they've never seen this dance that their client is in. They've never seen it. So they make all kinds of assumptions about the other person, which is, what is unfortunate about it is they tell their clients to leave relationships that from our point of view are perfectly workable because they don't know what else to tell them, So you have to be careful, but you can help people understand PTSD a bit. You can help people understand relationships. You can give people a safe place to talk about their own relationship. But in the end, if you want to change a relationship, you've got to have it in the room. So what I've done before is what we do in our institute sometimes is we say, well, why don't you just, would your husband like a phone call with me? I'm quite willing to talk on the phone. Sometimes you can talk to people, and when they actually hear you and hear that you're not, some judgmental witch who's going to tell them you're bad at relationships, they calm right down and they'll come in and they'll explore. So I've offered that. I also say, maybe your husband would like to read Hold Me Tight, because to our surprise, when I first put that book out, everyone said, only women will read a book with a title like that. Not true. Men want to know about how to make relationships work. That's what they want to know. And so we've had lots of men respond well to that. And even in the military, we did some post-deployment weekends based on Hold Me Tight. We have a program like that, right, which we're trying to talk to the Canadian military about using. We think it'd be very useful. But we have a program, and we took that program, the Hold Me Tight educational program, and we adapted it for soldiers, and we took it to the Navy SEALs in the west coast of the US. And they're about as macho as you can get, those Navy SEALs, and they loved it. They loved it. And they bought those copies, and the joke is, my favorite one is that the US military, with all its resources, asked us a few years ago, could we donate 100 copies of Hold Me Tight to their German bases? I felt like saying, goodness me, that would be one tire tread on a tank, wouldn't it, or something, couldn't it? But anyway, what the hell, we did it. We sent them 100 copies of Hold Me Tight, and the librarian at the base in Germany wrote to me and said, this is hilarious, you've made my year. It is so funny what's happening with this book. And I say, why, what's happening? And she said, well, what's really interesting is some men just come in and grab it because they've heard about it from other men. And the other men come in and say things like, that's a stupid title. That book must be a stupid book. I'm not reading that stupid book. And she said, I had one guy come in and say that 3 times, 3 days in a row. And then the 4th day he came in and he said, give me that book. Because all my friends say that it's going to help them with their wives, and I'm not getting along with my wife, and I don't want her to leave me, so give me that stupid book. And she said, and then he never bought it back. Basically, he stole it, right? So you can use that, you know, but in the end, what's hard is we live in a society where we focus on individuals. Believe me, I've tried to persuade the US and the Canadian military that the best way to take care of soldiers is to give them safe haven, secure base families. It's a hard sell. We're into treating individuals like as if we live as isolated individuals. You know, if we do, we're dysfunctional. Our ecological niche is close relationships. So why not create these healing environments? I don't understand it. But that's one of the issues too. People say, no, I should be able to fix myself and I'm going to be shamed. No couples therapist is going to be able to help me. Relationships aren't fixable anyway. I don't need that. And military organizations tell them the same thing. They say, we offered our services to Petawawa years ago for free. We said we'll do the whole thing. They had a whole bunch of couples who wanted to do it. And then some committee up there said, no, thank you, the soldiers don't need that. Hey, you know what? The soldiers do need that. But so our whole approach as individuals and as nations and as institutions has been to focus on the individual. So that gets tricky because, you know, when you say, try to persuade your husband to come in,